Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss India's growing relationship with Myanmar. In the past, India's relationship with Myanmar has been caught between idealism and realism, supporting democracy and also dealing with the military dictatorship. Today, circumstances seem more propitious. Myanmar is transiting towards democracy and opening itself to the world. India is also taking advantage of this opening up. There's been a flurry of visits to Myanmar, and the latest visit in the offing is of Defense Minister A.K. Antony, who's scheduled to be there between January 22nd and 23rd. To discuss India's relationship with Myanmar, I have a very distinguished panel with me. I have Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Director General of Indian Council of World Affairs. He's been an ambassador in Myanmar. Mohan Guruswamy, a Myanmar expert who's traveled extensively in Myanmar and is the Distinguished Fellow at Observer Research Foundation. Ambassador Eric Gonsalves, who's also served as a diplomat in Myanmar, has been Secretary in Ministry of External Affairs. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Ambassador Bhatia. What is the strategic significance of Myanmar for India? Why this flurry of high-level visits?
Well, strategic significance very clearly stems from both geography and history. First of all, it is our neighbor, both in land terms and the maritime terms. It's a specific location which is essentially a country sandwiched between India and China. That is another very clear explanatory factor. And the third factor is that it is also sandwiched between Southeast Asia and South Asia. And finally, of course, it is next door to the northeast of India. So taking all this into consideration, one can say it is undoubtedly of immense strategic significance. But more importantly, stemming from history and probably the factor of ethnicity, probably the oldest factor of proximity to the two countries is the ethnic link. The tribes living on our side of the border have very old familial and personal ties with people living on the other side of the border. And then on top of that, of course, the factors of religion and spirituality. Every major religion of India, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, have gone into Myanmar or Burma and have impacted on that country, shaped and molded.
There have also been a lot of people of Indian origin there. At one point, Indians used to control the business and educational institutions. Even now, I'm told about 25 lakh people of Indian origin are there.
Yes, but that came much later. I was taking you back to the era of antiquity. And through the time, monks, traders, merchants, scholars, they have all flowed into that country. So I think we need to recognize in our own country the age-old nature of ties and the way they have evolved through the ancient, medieval and modern period.
Okay. Mohan, how do we take these ties forward? Or have we been a bit late in recognizing the importance of Myanmar? Or do you think our policies have been on an even keel?
No, I think we've been late in recognizing the importance of Myanmar. But, as the ambassador said, this country is very important to us because, it is actually our access to the East. If you look at the economic map of India, it's Eastern India where the incidence of poverty and the density of, of poor people and, the deindustrialization of the economy is taking place. And those areas need markets and access to new markets and,
But has our policy been regime neutral?
Our policy has not been regime neutral. Our policy, waxes and wanes.
But our interests are regime neutral.
Our interests have become regime neutral because, of the insurgencies on both sides, and it's very essential to cooperate with the Burmese army across the border. And, the Indian army has been operating in those areas for many years, with the tacit consent of the local Burmese authorities. So I think that's very important. But, there are other factors in Burma, like it's exceedingly resource rich. It's got everything you want, and it's a big new market. And if you want to get the Northeast, link it to a market. And that is your next big market.
Okay, I'll just come back on that issue to you again. Ambassador Gonsalves, besides these factors, would you like to say there are other factors which are propelling this relationship today?
Yes, the difficulty was, in fact, that the internal situation in Burma from the time of the military takeover up and until recently when the government began to liberalize, made it rather difficult to deal with them. It's not just a question of being regime neutral, but we did have a stake in the elite that had grown up with our elite in the days of independence and post-independence. And people like Aung San Suu Kyi and her father and so on were all part of the family, so to speak, of the independence elite of India and Burma, which grew up together, who knew I had him, brought him out of wherever he was into India twice over. But this was a problem that for almost 50 years, we couldn't do very much because the army had a total tight grip, and it in fact pushed most of the old middle class elite out, Burmese, foreigners and so on. Then now they have seen the light, so to speak. They brought Aung San Suu Kyi back. It is possible to do business with them without trying to alienate one or the other. And more important than that, they have opened up in such a way that, and of course there has been other changes around, which have brought them back into the embrace of the West, which makes them able to access multilateral funding and so on, which makes development and infrastructure and above all connectivity, which is so important, a possibility between, not only just between us and Burma, but between the development of our Northeast and the whole of Southeast Asia and China.
Yeah, we're going to discuss that in greater detail.
Yeah.
Sir, I wanted to ask you, I mean, Mohan mentioned the insurgencies in the Northeast. Burma or Myanmar actually borders four northeastern states of India, except Mizoram. All the other states, Manipur, Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, have very active insurgencies. So, to what extent has this become the dominant sort of driving force of this relationship in terms of security relations and and having greater links with the Burmese army?
Bharat, I'm going to give you a somewhat unconventional view on this, and I hope you would also allow me to talk about one earlier point that was made by our
Sure, but
panelist.
quickly, sir.
Yeah, very quickly. I think this is not really a dominant factor. Okay. I think the larger politico-economic strategic picture has to be appreciated. Certainly, insurgency is a factor, but a lot of that work has to be done on our side of the border. We cannot keep looking at this small country and say, help us to solve our own problems. And so, this great expectation that by improving relations with Myanmar, we will have immense cooperation from their military in order to tackle our insurgency is inherently wrong. The point I also want to make earlier, it is wrong to say that our policy response has been inadequate or very late. I think you have to keep in mind that if this country has a situation where the military and the pro-democracy movement is split apart as they did in the past, India's policy response had to be cautious, it had to be calibrated.
Okay, sir. At that point, we'll have to stop you and I'll come back to you. We need to take a short break just now. Don't go away. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. Welcome back. We are discussing India's ties with Myanmar. Ambassador Bhatia, before we went on the break, you were saying that India's policy towards Myanmar has been calibrated. Now, to what extent has our policy been determined by our desire to contain China in Myanmar?
That is also one of the several factors, but I object to the word contain, and please don't think that I am trying to be just playing with words. Essentially, China's policy in Southeast Asia is watched very closely by our government, and obviously policy responses are shaped looking at the complexity of it all. In Myanmar itself, I think this idea that we are there to contain China is wrong. This idea that we are in a kind of an unrivaled competition with China, that is also wrong. We run our policy in terms of our own interests, and India has achieved a significant degree of success there. This fashion on part of some of our Burma policy critics to say that India has got it wrong is completely, in my view, misplaced.
Do you agree? Because after all, when J.N. Dikshit as Foreign Secretary decided to go to Burma in 1992-93, I think.
Incidentally, I was with him.
You were with him? Very good. So we have a lot of experience around this table.
Yeah.
But was it not because the Chinese were coming in a big way? They were investing in infrastructure. They were making, as you yourself said, a resource Burma into a resource hinterland.
Like all other statements, you can always partly agree with
good.
but because there is some truth in that also.
Yeah.
But the fact is that, we were worried for a long time about the dominance of China in decision making in Burma. And, the cutoff, relative cutoff of India from access to many of the contracts we bid for, oil concessions and various things, and the growing influence of China within the ruling military elite, we were all worried. The truth is that, the Chinese had come commercial interests had come as far as Tamu, across the river from Moray. So, to say that, we are not concerned about China is also not entirely right,
Which I have not said.
Yeah, but so therefore I said partly I agree with you. Therefore, but to say that, that the insurgencies didn't determine some of our policies, also not entirely true, because, I went there in the 90s, and part of that note which came to the army headquarters was that, then the army had begun interacting with the Burmese counterpart, and, the Narasimha Rao government began some military exchanges and some dialogue, because there were sanctuaries on the Burmese side.
They still are.
They still are, but those days they were actively supported by the Burmese army also, because, they were giving provisions and supplies, they were operating quite openly out there. Then they started informing the Indian army about where these camps are and things like that. But that cooperation was very essential, because, in the end of the day, when you start losing men, because there is sanction on the other side, that influences policy,
Ambassador Gonsalves, I was in Myanmar for Aung San Suu Kyi's by-election, and I found people there they actually harbor a lot of anti-China sentiment. In Mandalay, for example, in the markets, shop signs are written partly in Mandarin and also in Burmese. There are 50,000 Burmese kids learning Mandarin so that they can get jobs in Chinese shops. And Burmese would tell you, where is India? Why don't you come here and do business with us? Now, is that just to please Indian visitors, or do you really think that they want India to come in there because of cultural links and so on and so forth and do business? Earlier we were doing business. After all, we were thrown out by General Nevin.
Well, it's a very long story, and it's very much more complicated than this simplistic attitude. I mean, the whole question is one of the attitudes we adopt in relation to Southeast Asia. And for too long, I think we have seen it simply as a place where we can compete with China, which is not really the game. That is something in which we've already lost out, and we should not pretend that it is possible. We created BIMSTEC in the hope that we would be able to stop the Chinese from coming into. And frankly, if you ask any Southeast Asian, he will, including Singapore and Malaysia, who are much friendlier to us than the Burmese, that they will not go on a limb to bail you out, not do business with China. This is absurd. I mean, China is much more effective competitively. And in fact, the Chinese are doing only what the Japanese did before them. We were not thrown out by the Chinese.
It's more competitive, period.
They were more effective. And if we are more effective, people will buy our stuff or do business with us. I mean, we have priced ourselves out of the market, frankly, because most of our private sector and all of our public sector for a long time was not interested in Southeast Asia. They only looked west.
We're going to discuss that in the next section.
No, Bharat, I just want to very quickly and briefly mention that if you look at this thing from the viewpoint of Burma, that also is a very important thing. From the viewpoint of Yangon or Naypyidaw, the government as well as the business community, they need both neighbors, China and India. And in fact, they want a kind of a balance between the two, because in that balance lies the hope of real independence for Myanmar. So we have to keep that in mind.
I must add on to this, you see, because I'm actually working in a thing called BCIM, which is not very well known here. It is a
what does it stand for?
It is an NGO, from our point of view, which is Bangladesh, China, India and Myanmar. It's a regional forum. In our case, it's non-official because we do it out of two NGOs here. But in the case of the other countries, it's largely official, excepting Bangladesh, which has a partly non-official thing. And we have been trying to promote regional cooperation, regional connectivity, regional energy cooperation, and so on. And I find that when you go together with China in some of these things, it becomes easier, in fact, to unlock the energy cooperation or the connectivity cooperation than if you try to do it by yourself. So if you go simply as an India versus China affair, you are out of date.
All right. Mohan, let me ask you a slightly different question. Okay. I mean, the feeling I get is that we need not really be worried with China's rise in this region. No?
No, we should worry about
you're saying that
China's
we
rise.
should piggyback on it and sort of see it as complementary to India's rise?
I think we should recognize where the competition is. Okay. And in this competition, the fact of the matter is that we can only operate if we have a robust economic front which goes out from our northeast. Okay. And we are not strong enough in the northeast. We do not take the economic cooperation in Southeast Asia seriously, and therefore we don't exist. It's not because the Chinese are there and they're doing it, and we're not doing it.
Okay. One, the question I wanted to ask you was that China now has access to Bay of Bengal through the ports they're financing in Myanmar. They have access to the Arabian Sea through Gwadar port in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. They built Hambantota. They're building Colombo second port. So how do these activities impact India's maritime interests?
Is do I believe in the string of pearls? No, I think it's all nonsense. Because militarily it's not tenable. If you look at Sitwe, it's sitting half an hour away from our bases at Port Blair and other places. So, militarily it's important for China because 22 million tons of oil is going to go on that Sitwe-Kunming pipeline to China. So, therefore the vulnerability...
From Chaofu.
Yeah.
Chaofu, they built a huge tanker facility.
Yeah, but the vulnerability to India itself gives you a strategic advantage. Gwadar is not a functional Chinese port. Gwadar was built by the Chinese. So with Hambantota, the day Chinese naval ships anchor or base themselves there, it's a problem we'll deal with. I think India's capable enough of dealing with. And if I were the Chinese, would I put assets 20 minutes away from Indian forward bases? Strategically doesn't make any sense at all. But so I think Burma is important because it gives Indian business access. There is a telecommunication.
We're going to come back to that. We're going to come back to that. We need to take a short break now. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. We'll be back soon. Welcome back. We are discussing India's attempts to intensify its relationship with Myanmar. Before we went on the break, Ambassador, you wanted to say something about China and influencing India's maritime interests.
Very quickly, what I was essentially saying is that the Burma policy of India takes into consideration China's policy profile, but it is dictated by many other considerations. That is the central point. And therefore, today, we have to keep in mind we cannot work on dated information. In the last 2 years, Burma or Myanmar has undergone a significant change, even in its external profile. The US and West European countries, in Japan, Australia, they have all come into the picture in a big way. So it is no longer about only India, China and ASEAN. It is very much now about India, China, ASEAN and the West. Yeah. And therefore, the situation is completely different now than what it used to be until 2011.
Mohan, earlier we were discussing how we need to build closer sort of business ties with Myanmar. Now Myanmar is opening up and about 500 Indian businessmen have gone to Myanmar in the last 1 year. But not one of them has taken an investment decision. People go, they talk to government officials, they talk to Myanmar Chamber of Commerce, they come back and they don't invest. What is happening?
Well, I think for a start, I don't think any of the big players have been there.
But Tatas are there. They're setting an assembly plant they have there, a truck assembly plant.
Well, for instance, I think telecom, none of the players have gone there. Oil, they haven't gone there. Power sector.
SR has, ONGC Videsh has been going, GAIL has been going there.
Yeah, but that has the
So why are they not
it's
going there?
incumbent. You know, I think first of all, there hasn't been that drive. I think there's to some extent, I think the chambers and the government also has to push this. There hasn't been any significant study also on the economic potential of Burma. I was trying to look at something the other day and I couldn't find anything which was really interesting. And so I think there is a lot of knowledge gap also which needs to be filled in. And I think I think ICW probably has got something
No,
on.
with due respect, I have to disagree with you on this. And I must say that in the last 1 year, I'm personally aware of 4 to 5 major delegations which have gone there. 2 or 3 major promotional events have taken place there. President Thein Sein was in Mumbai just about 2 weeks back talking to some of the major barons of Indian industry. India is showing much more interest than it did before.
Nothing has
Nothing is materializing.
No, but let these figures speak for themselves. The investment figures are going up, trade is going up, and Indian decision to put lot of money in the infrastructure is going up. And on top of that, the border development projects is going up. So it's an unfolding story. Scholars will have to find out as they run the changing picture. And I think I would like to use this opportunity, Bharat, to tell our friends in India Inc. that caution is fine, but you cannot remain cautious and at the same time crib that China has come in.
So this is a good point. I'd like you to take off from where he's left.
no.
But I also want to ask you, I mean, how come neither FICCI, nor CII, nor ASSOCHAM, not even PhD Chamber of Commerce have got a local chapter there? There is something called the Indo-Myanmar Chamber of Commerce, which is run by people who are in the dal trade. Burma, as you know, is the second largest dal exporter to India.
We buy all the dal from there.
Yeah.
No, the problem is that what everybody is saying is partly correct. You see, there is a process of gestation and then you get the things working. But my impression, I mean, having participated in a whole number of meetings on look east policies and so on, is that frankly the private sector is not that interested because they do not see the kind of money that they can make elsewhere, and they are not making the effort in Southeast Asia, leave alone Myanmar. Southeast Asia is in fact a much better place. The other problem, frankly, also is that without the infrastructure, you cannot do very much. And the people who are responsible for infrastructure, namely the line ministries like the roads and the railways and the civil aviation and the airlines and so on, are not interested at all in Southeast Asia. I mean, Chinese Eastern, when I dealt with them first 5 years ago, told me that within 5 years, they would have a flight from Kunming to every major city in South and Southeast Asia, and they do have it. We have been dickering on one flight to Shanghai, one flight, no Kunming, one flight to Guangzhou 3 times a week or something like this. We just don't have...
I think it's an entirely different situation here, because, this, if you get into a competition with the Chinese government on throwing money.
No, not throwing money. I think he has a point on linkages. Listen, there's a bi-weekly flight via Bodh Gaya, and that also, doesn't operate all the time. In one season, it doesn't operate.
Flights will operate.
There are a dozen flights to Bangkok every day, to Chinese towns. You go to Mandalay, there are local airlines, Chinese airlines running this. There's no direct shipping links with India.
Flights will operate if there is a market. At this moment, today, there isn't that kind of market.
It's a chicken and egg situation. You create links and then trade
who
would
makes
take
the
place.
investment?
Who wants to send stuff through Singapore?
Who makes the commercial decision?
But this is the problem.
The government or the industry. If industry has to make a commercial decision,
it
has to be a market.
It has to be a joint decision, but neither really has the guts to do it. I mean, that is the fact. I mean, if you look at, if you want to go to Bangkok, you want to go to Rangoon, you want to go to Kunming, where do you go? You go through Bangkok. Yeah. Why? Because Thai Airways has been pioneering these things, just like Chinese Eastern. As Air India bothered, Air India doesn't care a damn.
No, sir, but the important thing is that we should study 2 things very calmly. One is as to what the other countries are doing with regard to this Myanmar or Burma. What are the Japanese doing? The Australians, the Thais, the South Koreans, and in a way even the Americans. They are not merely now studying it closely, they are, for example, taking into consideration the new FDI Act they have passed. They are actually putting in money. Look at the Japanese. Even in India, I mean, how many people know that in the past 6 or 7 years, Indian government had put in about $300 to $400 million of funds for the projects. They have set aside $500 million worth of line of credit, They have put in other additional money that were announced when the Prime Minister went there. So, sheer ignorance takes us to a position where we say nothing much is happening.
Okay, so my last question is to you, Mohan.
Due respect.
Yeah, no, absolutely, fine, sir. My question to you is, we've discussed, what's going wrong with our relations with Myanmar, and we are not doing enough, and it's an unfolding chapter. But my question to you is, why does one get the impression that our Look East policy and Burma or Myanmar being gateway to Southeast Asia, these are just empty slogans, because nothing much really happens.
When you have two professional diplomats here,
Yeah.
they think that all relations, commercial and otherwise, are led by the state.
We are not professional diplomats anymore. We both are scholars.
Well, you come back from that background. Yeah. You can't become a scholar overnight, So, to say that government will drive relations is wrong. Economic relations are driven by private capital.
Okay, so what needs to be done quickly?
No, what needs to be done, frankly, is what everybody is saying, that you must be willing to take a gamble and a certain amount of risk in building your relations towards your East, just as you have tried to do in the West, but in the West the returns have been faster.
Yeah. I think our strategic community needs to get its facts right, and it must begin to study this country objectively and not worry all the time about saying that India is doing nothing. This is far from the fact.
Okay. We've run out of time. That's all we have time for today. We'll come back next week with another interesting subject. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. Bye-bye.